Part 1. The Battle of Stalingrad, a turning point in World War II. The Battle of Stalingrad, one of the most significant confrontations in World War II, marked a decisive turning point in the conflict, fought between the Axis powers led by Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union. This battle became a symbol of the brutal and unrelenting nature of the Eastern Front. The Germans, aiming to secure the oil-rich Caucasus region and defeat the Soviet Union, launched an invasion of the city of Stalingrad in the summer of 1942. The city, located on the Volga River, was of strategic importance to the Soviets. It was an industrial hub, crucial for the Soviet war effort, and also symbolized the resilience of the Soviet people. For Hitler, capturing Stalingrad was a matter of prestige as well as military necessity. The German forces, initially confident in their ability to conquer the city quickly, soon found themselves engaged in a brutal urban battle. The battle began in August 1942, when German forces under General Friedrich Paulus launched their offensive to capture the city. The Germans initially made significant advances, pushing deep into the city. However, the Soviet defenders, led by General Vasily Chukov, put up fierce resistance, transforming the city into a scene of intense urban warfare. Soviet forces employed the defense-in-depth strategy, retreating into the inner parts of the city and forcing the Germans to fight for every building, every street, and every inch of territory. The Germans, unprepared for the ferocity of the Soviet defense and the harsh winter conditions, soon found themselves bogged down in a war of attrition. As the battle dragged on, it became clear that the Germans had underestimated the resilience and determination of the Soviet forces. In November 1942, the Soviets launched a massive counteroffensive, Operation Uranus, which encircled the German Sixth Army. Despite being trapped, Hitler insisted that the Germans should hold their position and refuse to retreat. This decision would ultimately lead to the destruction of the German forces in Stalingrad. The encirclement of the German Sixth Army by Soviet forces was a significant turning point in the battle. The Germans were now cut off from their supply lines, and the harsh winter conditions only made their situation worse. As the weeks passed, the German soldiers were left without food, ammunition, or reinforcements. Disease and frostbite ravaged their ranks, and morale plummeted. By February 1943, the situation for the Germans had become untenable. The Soviet forces continued to tighten their grip on the encircled German troops. The commander of the Sixth Army, General Paulus, requested permission to surrender, but Hitler refused. The Germans were now on the brink of collapse. On February 2nd, 1943, after months of fighting, General Paulus finally surrendered, marking the end of the Battle of Stalingrad. Over 90,000 German soldiers were taken prisoner, and the defeat was a crushing blow to the German war effort. The loss of Stalingrad marked the beginning of a series of German defeats on the Eastern Front, and the tide of the war had begun to turn in favor of the Soviets. The consequences of the Battle of Stalingrad were far-reaching. The German army, once considered invincible, had suffered its first major defeat in the war. The loss of Stalingrad shattered the myth of Nazi invincibility and weakened the morale of the German people. On the Soviet side, the victory was a moment of immense pride and a symbol of their ability to extend the most brutal of invasions. Victory at Stalingrad also had significant strategic implications. It halted the German advance into the Soviet Union and allowed the Soviets to launch a counteroffensive that would eventually push the Germans all the way back to Berlin. The battle also demonstrated the importance of morale, leadership, and the willingness to sacrifice in the face of overwhelming odds. In conclusion, the Battle of Stalingrad was not just a military victory. It was a turning point in the broader conflict of World War II. The Soviet victory at Stalingrad changed the course of the war on the Eastern Front, dealt a devastating blow to the Nazi Germany, and marked the beginning of the Allies' push toward victory in Europe. Part 2. The Aftermath and Strategic Consequences of the Battle of Stalingrad. The surrender of the German Sixth Army at Stalingrad marked not only a pivotal moment in the war, but also set the stage for major strategic shifts on both the Eastern and Western fronts. The battle's outcome reverberated across the globe, influencing the military and political dynamics of World War II in profound ways. The Soviet victory at Stalingrad was a major turning point, not just for the Red Army, but for the entire Allied war effort. The immediate aftermath of the battle saw a dramatic shift in the balance of power on the Eastern Front. The Germans, reeling from their defeat, were forced into a defensive posture that they would struggle to maintain for the remainder of the war. Hitler's ambitious plans for a quick victory in the East were now shattered, and the Germans were unable to mount another successful offensive on the scale of Operation Barbarossa. The battle left the Wehrmacht depleted, demoralized, and on the retreat. Strategically, the loss of Stalingrad had long-lasting consequences for Nazi Germany. The defeat exposed the vulnerability of the German military and its overstretched supply lines. It also undermined the myth of Nazi invincibility, which had been carefully crafted by Hitler's propaganda machine. The Germans were no longer able to maintain their momentum in the East, and the Soviets capitalized on this shift by launching a series of offensives that would eventually push the Germans back to their own borders and beyond. On the Soviet side, the victory at Stalingrad had a transformative effect on the Red Army's morale and its ability to carry out offensive operations. The psychological impact of Stalingrad was also felt on the home front in both Germany and the Soviet Union. In Germany, the loss was a blow to national pride, and it marked the beginning of the end for the Third Reich. Hitler, who had once been seen as an infallible leader, now faced increasing doubts from his military and political subordinates. The defeat at Stalingrad also damaged the morale of the German public, who had been led to believe that victory in the East was within reach. In the Soviet Union, the victory at Stalingrad was seen as a symbol of the strength and resilience of the Soviet people. It became a source of pride and national unity, and it was used extensively in Soviet propaganda to inspire further resistance against the German invasion. The victory reinforced the legitimacy of Stalin's leadership and solidified the Soviet Union as a major player in the global struggle against fascism. Internationally, the Battle of Stalingrad had far-reaching implications. It marked the first major defeat for Nazi Germany and served as a rallying point for the Allies. The Soviet victory in Stalingrad convinced many that the tide of the war had turned and that the defeat for Nazi Germany was now a realistic possibility. The Allies, particularly the United States and the United Kingdom, began to shift their focus towards supporting the Soviet Union and increasing their efforts on the Western Front. The victory at Stalingrad also demonstrated the growing cooperation between the Allies, particularly the United States and the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union, having suffered greatly during the first years of the war, now emerged as a critical force in the fight against the Axis powers. The United States, which had only recently entered the war, began to provide increased military aid to the Soviet Union, including supplies, equipment, and other forms of assistance. This partnership, although initially tenuous, would become one of the most important aspects of the Allied war effort. The Soviets, emboldened by their victory, launched a series of offensives in the winter of 1943-1944, pushing the Germans further back across Eastern Europe. The German retreat from Stalingrad marked the beginning of a broader Soviet push that would eventually culminate in the fall of Berlin in 1945. The Germans were now forced to fight a defensive war on multiple fronts, with the Soviet Union in the east, the Allies in the west, and the Italian campaign continuing to drain their resources. One of the key lessons that emerged from the Battle of Stalingrad was the importance of logistics and supply lines in modern warfare. The Germans, who had relied on speed and surprise in their earlier campaigns, were now faced with the harsh realities of a drawn-out conflict in which the ability to maintain supplies and reinforcements was critical. The Soviet victory at Stalingrad showed the importance of a well-organized and a well-supported army, capable of enduring the hardships of prolonged warfare. The loss of Stalingrad also highlighted the crucial role of air superiority in modern warfare. The Luftwaffe, which once had dominated the skies over Europe, was now stretched thin, unable to provide the necessary support for German ground forces. The Soviet Air Force, while not as powerful as the Luftwaffe, was able to take advantage of the Germans' logistical weaknesses and gain control of the airspace over Stalingrad. This air superiority allowed the Soviets to conduct devastating bombing raids and prevent the Germans from resupplying their encircled forces. The German Sixth Army, which had once been one of the most formidable fighting forces in the Wehrmacht, was now a broken and defeated army. The soldiers who survived the battle were taken prisoner by the Soviets, many of whom would spend years in Soviet captivity. The loss of the Sixth Army was a major blow to Germany's ability to wage war and marked the beginning of a shift in the overall strategic direction of the war. The Battle of Stalingrad was not just a military defeat for the Germans, but also a catastrophic psychological blow. The Germans had been unable to achieve their objectives in the East, and the defeat shattered the illusion that they could still win the war. The battle exposed the limits of German military power and the flaws in Hitler's leadership. For the Soviets, on the other hand, Stalingrad was a symbol of their resilience and determination, a victory that would resonate throughout the war and beyond. Part 3. The long-term impact and legacy of the Battle of Stalingrad. The Battle of Stalingrad, with its immense loss of life, devastation, and strategic significance, would leave an indelible mark on the course of World War II and the post-war world order. While the battle itself was a brutal conflict fought with unrelenting ferocity, its aftermath reverberated throughout the remaining years of the war, shaping both the military and political landscape of Europe. The defeat of the German Sixth Army had immediate and long-term consequences for Nazi Germany. As the German forces continued to retreat from Stalingrad, they were forced to abandon any hopes of securing a swift victory in the East. In the wake of their loss, Hitler's leadership began to face mounting criticism, both within his inner circle and among the German military. The strategic failure at Stalingrad exposed the vulnerability of Nazi Germany's war strategy, and its defeat in the Soviet Union would mark the beginning of a series of German retreats. As German morale sank and their military position weakened, the Soviet Union became more confident and capable in its military operations. The victory at Stalingrad provided a morale boost not only to the Soviet troops, but also to the civilian population. Stalingrad, once a symbol of destruction and suffering, transformed into a symbol of Soviet resistance, resilience, and ultimate triumph. Soviet propaganda capitalized on this victory, portraying it as a turning point in the war, highlighting the strength of the Soviet people and the ineptitude of the Nazi regime. The military impact of the battle could not be overstated. The battle had resulted in the annihilation of the German Sixth Army, with over 90,000 men taken prisoner and tens of thousands killed. This loss drastically weakened Germany's ability to continue fighting on the Eastern Front and allowed the Soviets to launch a series of offensives that would push the Nazis back from Soviet soil. By the time the battle ended, the Germans had lost key territory, including the industrial city of Stalingrad, and they would never again recover the initiative in the East. The war of attrition that followed would stretch the German military thin, with the resources spread too thin to mount a significant counterattack. In addition to the strategic loss, Stalingrad also exposed the flaws in Nazi military leadership. Hitler's refusal to allow his generals to make tactical decisions and his insistence on fighting to the last man ultimately led to the destruction of the Sixth Army. His obsession with capturing Stalingrad, a symbolic target, overruled military pragmatism. In contrast, the Soviet leadership under Joseph Stalin, despite his own flaws, allowed his generals to make decisions based on the changing dynamics of the battlefield. The German military's failure at Stalingrad revealed the importance of flexible leadership and the need for coordination between military and political strategies. The political ramifications of the Battle of Stalingrad were profound. While the Germans were left reeling from their defeat, the Soviet Union gained not only a significant military advantage, but also international recognition. The success of the Soviet army on the battlefield increased the credibility of the USSR and its influence in the global arena. The battle demonstrated that the Soviet Union could stand up to Nazi Germany, and it helped to shift the balance of power in favor of the Allies. Furthermore, the loss of Stalingrad marked a turning point in Hitler's image in Germany and abroad. Once seen as an invincible leader, Hitler's credibility now began to wane. The failure to capture Stalingrad was a major blow to the Nazi propaganda machine, which had long touted Germany's military superiority. As German defeats continued to mount, the Allies began to see a clear path to victory, and the role of the Soviet Union in the eventual defeat of Nazi Germany became increasingly important. The victory at Stalingrad also had significant implications for the course of the war on other fronts. With the Germans reeling from their defeat in the east, the Allies were now able to launch a coordinated series of offensives on both the western and eastern fronts. In the west, the Allies began planning the D-Day invasion, which would eventually lead to the liberation of France and the defeat of Nazi forces in Western Europe. The opening of a second front in France put additional pressure on the German military, which was already stretched thin in the east. As the Soviets pushed westward, liberating occupied territories, they also began to focus on the reconstruction of their war-torn homeland. Stalingrad, once a symbol of the Soviet Union's suffering, would now become a symbol of its resilience and strength. The victory in the city marked a turning point, not just militarily, but also politically, as the Soviet Union began to take a leading role in shaping the post-war order in Europe. In the years following the battle, Stalingrad remained a focal point in Soviet propaganda. The Soviet Union constructed monuments and commemorative sites to honor the bravery of those who had fought and died in the battle. The city itself was rebuilt, and its name was later changed to Volgograd, but its significance remained firmly rooted in Soviet history. The battle became a cornerstone of Soviet identity, representing both the nation's determination to resist and its ultimate victory over the fascist threat. For the German public, The defeat at Stalingrad marked the beginning of the end for the Third Reich. While the war would continue for 2 more years, the loss of the Sixth Army, combined with subsequent defeats, shattered the myth of Nazi invincibility. The German military was no longer seen as the unstoppable force it once was, and the war effort began to unravel. In the months following Stalingrad, the Allies continued to apply pressure on Germany, and the fall of the Third Reich became inevitable. The significance of the Battle of Stalingrad is also reflected in the broader narrative of World War II. The battle was not just a confrontation between 2 armies. It was a clash of ideologies, a battle for survival. The Soviet Union's determination to resist Nazi invasion and its eventual victory in Stalingrad marked a victory for the ideals of freedom, resistance, and national unity. It also underscored the importance of solidarity among the Allied nations and their shared fight against fascism. Looking back at the battle, it is clear that the victory at Stalingrad was not simply a military triumph. It was a monumental event that reshaped the course of history. The fall of Stalingrad marked the beginning of the end for Nazi Germany and set the stage for the eventual liberation of Europe. It showed that, even in the face of seemingly insurmountable odds, resistance could prevail, and it gave hope to the millions who were suffering under the yoke of fascism. The Battle of Stalingrad will always be remembered as one of the most pivotal moments of World War II, a battle that embodied the horrors and the triumphs of the conflict. It is a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the ability to endure in the face of overwhelming adversity. For the Soviets, it was a victory that secured their place in history, while for the Germans, it was a defeat that signaled the beginning of the end of the Third Reich. As the war progressed and the Allies closed in on Berlin, the memory of Stalingrad remained a powerful symbol of resistance and determination. In the end, the Battle of Stalingrad was not just a victory for the Soviet Union, it was a victory for all those who fought against the forces of tyranny, a testament to the enduring strength of the human spirit in the face of unimaginable challenges.